is someone, interestingly, I've always known him in the common platform we are on, the community. But I've not, this event is now bringing me to, I think I'm seeing him, except if he can confirm if I've seen him physically before, but I'm thinking I'm seeing him physically or even electronically for the first time today. But I've known him for as many years as we've been together in the Power BI community. And he's someone who, for those who are in that community, you just know the guys that their Power BI expertise is like smoking pots. Like there's like steam coming out of their heads. So, that's the kind of person he is. So it's a great pleasure to have him in the house today. He's going to be sharing with us, very, very something powerful about Power BI, which is the DAX. But then he's taking an approach that is different from every other approach we've had in the previous sessions. And also his job role is one that some of you who you've always been wanting to maybe get some other perspectives to how you use this Power BI in a data-heavy environment. Please ask him your questions. Don't just let your questions be tied around the things he's presenting on. If you have any question that is out of scope, hold him down here and ask him so that you get the value. He's the kind of person that, if you ask questions about on the platform too much, we'll call him out for you. We'll call him and say, bros, come and answer the question. That pass the level of the rest of us. So, not to take too much time and to get him to do what is our plan for us. I just want you to know that it's someone that you should be willing to ask whatever questions you have, in this entire Power BI there, and it's going to give you very, very relevant answers. So it's a privilege to call up Mr. Ramon Bello, and it's a pleasure to have him in the house today. So, sir, the floor is yours. I'll be in the chat and trying to make sure that background noise is going down there. So thank you, sir. Stop sharing.
Right. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's a privilege. I've actually known Michael for a very long time. I think we only met once briefly, and that was a long time ago, somewhere around Bagada. But it was very brief. But since then, of course, we usually have this chat on Power BI group, and yeah, there are times that it gets hard. I'll just say, okay, please, I need help, and you get responses from people in the community, including Michael himself, that shares, okay, I think this is a better way to do this. Let's do it this way, that way. It's someone that I've actually learned from different times. So I'm glad to join the session today and talk about DAX. All right, I'm just going to get started. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the chat as we move along. Maybe as I move, we can just pick one or two questions and put an answer to it and move along. We'll try not to, drag the session such that we then keep everybody beyond the time we've actually planned. I'm going to start off by saying, okay, the reason why I picked this topic is a lot of time, I respond to people's questions. Sometimes some people even, just reach out and say, okay, can you help me with this? And we schedule a time and we have conversation. At the end of the day, you find out that most of the issues that are being raised has actually been documented if you look at the documentation. So let's say you're using a calculate function, and when you use those functions and you check the documentation, they put a lot of remarks to say, okay, do this, but don't do this. If you do A, it will give you B. And what I noticed over years is, yeah, it seems a lot of people in the community, maybe they don't understand the documentation, or they're just not patient enough to just look at the documentation and say, okay, it seems I'm having this problem, but this is the way I'm supposed to handle this, because the documentation will actually make it very clear. So today we're just going to take a different approach, like Michael said, and we're going to go over Dax, just do a brief intro, and we take some sample functions and we look at how the documentation itself is structured. How can you, maybe as an expert or you are a starter, how can you pick up and just, you have a problem and okay, I have to go from point A to point B. How can I leverage the documentation to get there? What are the exceptions? What can I learn from this? So that's essentially what we'll be talking about. So I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to start off with this. It's just my own conviction, from interacting with people within the community, working with different people on different projects, and when we come to the issue of Dax. What I've noticed is the difference between a Dax novice and a pro is usually a grasp of the documentation. I can assure you there's maybe few or nobody that actually knows every single function that is in Dax offhand, or knows the exception, the return, or whatever exception that is put in place for each of those functions. But what you noticed is people who understand the documentation, immediately you ask them a question, even if they do not know the answer, they have an idea. Okay, you ask me this question, how can we solve it? Okay, it seems we can use a function like calculate function, or we can use a function like distinct count. For one reason or the other, look at the problem, look at the function, look at the expected outcome. The person just most likely rush into the documentation. Just do a quick read. What are the inputs? What does the syntax look like? And what are the exceptions that you need to be careful about when you are writing this function? So if you are a novice, even if you are within the middle of this, I need to assure you that there is nothing to be afraid of. It's pretty much simple to learn. And learning Dax is, when you get to a level, you just become simple. Not simple for the fact that you actually know everything. You don't know everything. But it's simple for the fact that there is a rich documentation that you can leverage that can help you to get from point A to point B. Just a quick intro of what Dax is. If you mention Dax to maybe somebody that has never heard of it, you'll be like, what is Dax? Is it a Python library, or what programming language is it? It simply means data analysis expression. It's a formula. You can swear call it a formula. Excel is something most people use. Excel is a day-to-day tool. And when you use your Excel, you write formula on Excel. Same thing apply here. Dax is also a formula. Essentially, it's a formula expression language used in Power BI and other data products. So most other analytics products that you find with Microsoft, they are built around this. The SACs and some other products like that, they are also built around Dax. The documentation is simply a reference manual that guides user on how to use Dax function. It explains the inputs, the return, the usage, the context, most importantly, the context, because there are some things you think about sometimes, but you notice that by the time you apply it, it really doesn't work. Now, the reason why it doesn't work is not as if the formula is wrong or you get something wrong, but what you are missing is essentially the context. What's the context? At what point do I use this? What should I be doing? Do I use this? Those are simple stuff that you need to know before you put some formula into operation. I grabbed this screenshot from Dax guide. So there are like two major libraries that primarily I leverage, and most people in the community also leverage. Is that you're using the actual documentation? Let me just do a quick check here. I have it on my browser. Okay, here. This is the official Microsoft documentation for Dax, and this is Dax guide. I think most of you, if you have probably used Dax in one way or the other, you most likely have head of SQL BI, Marco Rubio, and other guys who have worked on this. And it's essentially the same thing, like a replica of what you have on the official documentation. But sometimes you just find a reason to come here and see how a function is presented, or how the what perspective does it come from, and that way you can balance out. Okay, it seems this is what I need to do. Going back to the presentation. So essentially, when you look at the whole documentation, this is essentially how it's segregated. There's one thing that is different in Dax guide, use aggregation function. If you go to the official documentation, you'll probably find all the functions under statistical function. They're essentially the same thing. The reason why they separate them is based on what is returned. So if you look at it from here, you see each of the category has some explanation telling you, okay, if you use this function, this is what you should expect. Like the aggregation function, it tells you return a scalar value. A scalar value is just a number. Let's say you want to see a minimum. You have an array, or you have a column that has numbers, and you want to return the minimum number on that column. You have a function like min, which means like minimum. Now, when you pass the column into the minimum function will return a number, a single number. That single number is a scalar number. So, which contributes to core of what you need to understand when you use the documentation. Some things that are used, some wording that are used are properly defined even within the function. So if you are within the documentation, even if you are new, you haven't used it before, you just stumble into the documentation, there are some few things you need to do first, because most of the jargons that you're going to get along the line, they have been predefined as well. So when you say, okay, what's a table, what's a column, what's a function, what's a scalar value, what's an expression, those are things that maybe to somebody that is coming from Excel, it might sound somehow weird. Okay, you said expression. When do we use expression in Excel? The person, sound confused. But when you look at it, it's just the same thing as what you are doing on Excel. Only that, okay, here in the documentation is defined. You just need to go and look for, okay, how do they define it? What does it mean when you say, okay, this thing return a scalar value, this thing is an aggregation, this thing is a table, is a column, is an expression, and on and on. Now, those are like concepts. Those are things that have been defined that if you are using Dax, you need to know. And if you're going to use the documentation, they're like preliminaries that you need to learn. You have the date and time function. So everything dates, you find it under the date and time function. There's filter function. That's where the popular, calculate function. Almost anything you need to do a lot of time, calculate function always come into play. It's one of the example of filter function. You have other ones. You have financial function. So for the accountants, the tax guys, the auditors, using Power BI, a lot of those functions that you most likely need. Let's say you are calculating interest rates, you are calculating revenue, and on and on. Most of those functions are already, they're already pre-designed in the financial function. You have the information function, you have the logical function, math and trig, doing cosine, sine, and other trigonometry function. They are all represented. There are other functions, there are parent-child function, relationship function, and on and on. There's so much more that you can see within the documentation. How you get to know, okay, what do I pick next? It's, number one is what you're trying to do. Okay, for example, you want to calculate the total revenue per category. Okay, and you have a revenue column. Okay, you can use a calculate function. Calculate function is a filter function. So okay, I need a calculate function. Then I need an aggregation function that will help me to calculate maybe the sum or the average, and on and on. So the way you use this is just for you to know, what do I want to do? When you know what you want to do, okay, I need this function, that function. I need something that can do this. You can essentially just walk into the documentation. Let's say you want to do something like a filter. Just walk into the documentation, go to the filter category and see, okay, these are the filters that are available, and you can quickly read it off and come up with something that will help you get through it. We're still going to talk about some example function within each of these categories later down the line. What do you use DAX for? That's something else. So when you use Power BI, a lot of time you hear DAX, okay, you need to do this, A, B, C, D. What do you use it for? I just put a quick info here. Okay, you use it to calculate a measure, which is more or less calculating a result that takes into consideration your context. So for example, it's a different thing when you say, okay, give me the sum of revenue. Let's say you have a column called revenue. Give me the sum of revenue. What the sum of revenue will simply do for you is just to add every value in the column. It has it together and give you a final result. But a lot of time, that's not what you're looking for. Even though you want the total revenue, sometimes you want to be able to slice the revenue to say, okay, if I have different departments, I have departments, let's say sales, you have marketing, you have distribution, you have logistics, you have supply chain. Each of these, you want to say, okay, what's the revenue per category? That's where okay, there's a contest. You want to put a contest into what you're doing, then okay, I need to create a measure. A measure helps you, calculate and taking into consideration your context. You have calculated column as well. So it's just essentially creating additional fields. Let's say you have let me just give a quick example here. So this is a table in Power BI. Let's say for some reason I need to create one additional table. I can create a new column here. So once I create a new column, maybe for whatever reason, I can use whether the dates. Okay, if you see here, there's months. Let's say I want to add one more. Let's say I want to add year. This is me creating a column. I can just say, okay, pick year for me from this date. I already have a date here. In my calendar table, I want the year. I click enter and it gives you a new column. So this is me creating a new column. It's part of what you use DAX for. You can create a calculated table as well. So for example, let's say you have an existing table and you want to create a new table out of it. Now, for whatever reason, you probably want to create it. Also, you can use DAX to create it. There are functions that when you read them, what they return is a table. So let's say you use like a calculated table, you use select column, you use some of them, as we would discuss later in our conversation. Those are their functions that will return a table for you. So whatever you are trying to create, whether you want to create a measure, a calculated column, a calculated table, DAX is what you use. There's row level security, but I just asterisk it because I don't want to go into it, because row level security is a whole conversation on its own. But when you are defining your row level security as well, DAX also come into play. All right, let's just move into the whole primary conversation as it is. What's the typical structure of a DAX function? And when you look into the documentation, it's usually these six headings. You have a doc string, which is more like telling you what a function do, what that function will do. You have a syntax, you have a parameter. The parameters are like they're like things that you feed into the syntax. You have a return value, that's your expected outcome. You have remarks. Remarks are very, very important. You need to know what exceptions is this thing telling me, and it gives you a sample code, like sample use case. Let me just give you a quick example here. I put some notes down here. Going back to my browser. Okay, here I am. Let's use this for now. Let's pick one, for example. Let's say distinct. Yeah, distinct. So this is a sample, this is a Dax function. Now this is the regular doc string. Don't mind me calling it doc string. If anybody here is familiar with, let's say, Python, for example, and you write a function, we usually, you put in a doc string into your function. Your doc string is what tells the next person using the function to say, okay, this is what the function does. Then it gives you some other things that you had, blah, blah, blah. The same thing is happening here. At the top, you see, okay, return a one column table that contains the distinct value from the specified column. It's essentially telling you what this function would do. So it tells you what you are passing in is a column. So let's say, like I create a year column, I want to create another column that is, or for any reason, I want just the distinct year that is in that column. I could pass it into a distinct function. So it tells me what the distinct function will do. It leaves me a note. It tells me, okay, this function cannot be used to return value into a cell or column on a worksheet. Rather, you nest distinct function within a formula to get a list of distinct value that can be passed to another function, then counted, sum, or used for other operations. Now, these are important notes that helps you know, okay, if you are using distinct under any setting, you already know, okay, there are some important notes that you need to take care of, because you might decide to use it somewhere, then it doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't compute, you get errors. But don't let us go into that. Like I said, the next thing is the syntax. It gives you a syntax and tells you, okay, this is how you apply this. Now, within the syntax, you have the parameters. The parameters are like what you are going to pass into the syntax. Then it gives you an opportunity. It explains what it is. It said the column from which unique value are to be returned, or an expression that return a column. Now, it's very important for you to know exactly what this is, because it's essentially giving you a hint to say, okay, this is the syntax, this is how you operationalize this function. Then it tells you this is what this function expects, because it tells you pass in a column. Now, you need to make sure you are passing in a column, because if you don't pass in a column, then it doesn't give you anything to return. And at the same time, you need to pay attention to the return value, because it's one thing for you to pass in a parameter. You need to know what you're expecting, because at the end of the day, it's going to give you a result. Each function takes an input and gives you an output. The output is the return value. What is it going to look like? Now, the output is going to give you is a column of unique values. Now, if you listen to it, it said a column. Now, there are some others that will return a scalar value, but this one is telling you there's a column. Then it gives you a remark. Now, it's very important for you to see what the remark is saying, because this is where you know whatever context you're operating from. When would this thing work? Where will it not work? Because there are sometimes you pass it where you shouldn't have passed it, and it doesn't work. Now, for example, if you look at the second note, it said this function is not supported for use in direct query mode. Now, if you are working with, let's say, a data that you want to update in real time, you are most likely going to use a direct query. Now, if you use this function on a table that is being returned through a direct query, you might run into an exception, might give you an error, throw up an error and say, okay, this function is not acceptable here, or for some other reason. So that's why you need to pay attention to the remarks. The remarks tells you, even though this thing works, but there are some areas that when you apply it, it doesn't work. Now, the list I gave is not exhaustive, because when you look at some functions, what the documentation show you doesn't necessarily have to be everything. Sometimes there are some other things that are added. Now, like this, it tells me there are some related functions that I can use. There's a version of the distinct function that you can use. Okay, a distinct, then you pass in a table that return a table by removing duplicate row from another table or expression. Now, the value function is similar to distinct function, but of course, there are contexts to which you use them. Let's say you are writing a calculate table, for example. You pass a column into a column into a value, then it return a distinct column for you. But all the same, it just give you a hint. So when you're doing something and that thing, this thing is not working. Now there are some related functions that they've given you that you can easily look up. Maybe, okay, value is the right thing for you to do. Then you can look up value and see where it works. Another thing you need to see is there are examples. There are usually examples when you look at this documentation. It gives you a quick example. Okay, what do I need to do? So for example, if you look at this, now this distinct function is used on a table called customer key. Now, after doing that, the owner passes in a count row function. The count row function then tells you the number of distinct value that is returned by this. Don't let us digress. Let's just speak it one after the other. Let me just stop for a moment and let's say if there is any question that I need to pick before we move on.
Any questions from anyone? So while you were speaking, what I did was I tried to grab the link to the documentation page, so I pasted it. Then I also grabbed the link to the Dax guide, I pasted it. Then there's also a box that kind of like built around, almost like the Dax guide is built around the Dax documentation. There's this box that we built around the Dax documentation. I also posted it. But before then, there were no, except someone who mentioned, okay, yeah, so Thomas did say that are there any Dax experts here who can help it after the meeting? So, but what he did was he also said he can connect to him. So he posted his LinkedIn profile so you can connect. Okay? So I replied, and then I also pasted the community link where we have you and me and some other guys. So in case if you want to also access the other people, and other people can take advantage of the community link. So that's what has happened in the back end while you are presenting.
All right.
But no questions actually.
Okay, let's just move on then. Okay. Okay, while we've looked at some of the, the typical structure that you get in this thing, I pick up, for each of the categories, I just pick up some sample function that we can look at and just use it to acclimatize or just use it to explain how the documentation is structured, so that you, as a final user, you can make a better use of it. But before I move into looking at each of these functions that I've highlighted, there are two things that I wanted to mention. That is, I think it's very important for anyone. That is, if you are a beginner, you probably need to understand what the parameter naming usually look like. Let me open it up. So when you look at the function I showed earlier, let me just go back to it. Now, when you look at this parameter, there are things that you see inside the parameters that maybe based on where you are coming from, you probably don't understand what it means or how it is explained. Let me bring up a much more. So this is calculate function. Now, if you look into the calculate function, you see it tells you put in an expression, then put in a filter, then a filter 2, and on, meaning you can pass in several filters. Now, it gives you what it is here, the expression to be evaluated. Now, if, for example, you do not understand what does it mean by expression. Now, these DAX parameters is why they are created for you. So, for example, you're looking at a documentation, for a function, and the documentation is telling you an expression. Then you ask yourself, what does it mean? All you just need to do is go to the parameter naming. The parameter naming is also part of the documentation, and it shows you, okay, whatever you're going to see is whatever parameter that any function is going to throw at you is probably going to be within this list of parameter names. Now, the first one is expression. Expression is any Dax expression that returns a single scalar value. Now, if you look at it, if you want to do, let's say, calculate, for example, let me go back to the calculate function. No. Did I close it? Okay, here. Now, if you look at the calculate function, it tells you pass in an expression first. Now, if you come down here, you see the expression here. Now, the person who operationalizes this knows, okay, I need to pass in an expression. What is an expression? Expression is essentially any Dax function or any Dax expression computation that returns a scalar value. Now, when you use a function like sum, count row, all of these functions, they return a scalar value. Let me show you something. Remember I mentioned this aggregation function the other time. Now, if I look at this, now all of these functions here, they are aggregation function. I can essentially pass them in because their output will give me an expression because they are going to return a scalar value to me. So if I'm writing a Dax function or I'm into the documentation, like I have the calculate function here, and it tells me, when I look at the parameters, it tells me, okay, this expression to be evaluated, the expression to be evaluated, then you ask yourself, what is an expression? If you come to the parameter names, it tells you any Dax expression that returns a single scalar value, where the expression to be evaluated multiple times. Now, if you look down here, I have my aggregation function. And this aggregation function returns a scalar value. Applying an aggregation function to a column or to an expression evaluated by iterating a table expression. So, for example, I want to calculate total revenue for each category that I have. Now, I already know, okay, I'm using a calculate function. But part of the parameter in my calculate function is I need to pass in an expression. And by definition of what an expression is, I know an expression should return a scalar value. So I need a function that can return a scalar value and that can give me multiple results when I put in when I do a computation. So if I'm going to do, let's say, sum of the revenue. Now, if I'm going to do sum, I know sum will return a scalar value because sum is an aggregation function. So I know I have that covered already. Now, if I look into I know, okay, I can pass in a sum. I can pass in count. I can pass in count rows. I know I have that covered. Now, if you look at the later part, it tells me, okay, I need to pass in a filter. Now, a filter is a function. Then you can go in there and look for, okay, what's a filter? You can search for it, for example, a filter. It shows me what a filter is, but don't let us digress. Let's just stay at the parameter names. It gives you a value, any expression that returns a singular scalar value, where the expression to be evaluated exactly once before all other operations. Now, a scalar value is just a value. So if I say, okay, the value is 10, 10 is a value. The value is 20, 20 is a value. Now you have some functions that can help you. You can pass them in because you know their output is a scalar value, a single value. So like count, for example. For whatever reason, when it tells you, okay, this thing is a value, you can pass in a value. Or you just put in a number, 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on and so forth. Or you could just be an expression that returns a value to you. Another thing is a table. What does it mean? When they say, okay, a table, it means a number of columns that is put together. It's called a table. This is let me just show a quick example of what a table is. In Power BI, this is an example of a table. When you look at it, even though I'm just showing you a calendar table here, the calendar table is still a table. This is a table. This is a table. So within a table, you see a number of columns. It could be 1, it could be 100, it could be 15, it could be 1,000. But when you get to a table is usually, like this, has multiple columns, one or multiple columns. So when you are, you see a function and it tells you, okay, what I'm accepting is a table, you automatically know, okay, this, I have to pass in a table. Let's just pick something close. Let me close this. This is a function, for example. Just show you an example. If you look at this is a summarized function. This function tells you the first parameter you pass in is a table. Any expression that returns a table of data. So you already know, okay, what's a table? You know what a table is, because by definition here, you know, okay, this is a table. And there are other functions that can return a table. Okay, I want to pass in a table, or I want to just reference a table that I've pre-created in my data model. Then you pass it in. You already know, okay, this is a table. You have something else, okay, table name. The name of an existing table using standard Dax syntax. So it cannot be an expression. A table name is a table name. So what I just showed you here, for example, here, this is a table name, calendar. This is a table name, association. This is a table name, associated product, details. So when he asks you to pass in that, you already know, okay, what does it mean? This is what it means. You pass in a table name. A name. Now, a string constant that will be used to provide the name of a new object. So I put up a function now, summarize. So if you look at in the middle of this summarize, there's something here, a name. Now, a name is usually maybe like a single string that you will type in. So I'm trying to create a new table, and it tells me, okay, part of the parameter is a name. It comes here, the name given to a total or summarized column, enclosed in double quotes. It's just like when you're doing, let's say you want to concatenate, maybe you have a column with several string or integers, and you want to add maybe a string to it. Let's say I have 1, 2, 3. I want to change it. I want to create a new column called day 1. I can concatenate day, which is a name. I can concatenate it to that number. It gives me what I'm looking for. Same thing goes here. It asks you to put in a name. You can as well just type, put in an enclosed double quotes and put the name in between. You have others like order. When you want to sort this, you use it, but maybe, let's say it's not common, but it's just a way of sorting whatever you're working on. So you want to return a table and you want it sorted in one way or the other. You can use order. You can use ties and you can use type. Now these are like parameters that are not very common, but you definitely get it in one way or the other when you're working on some certain tasks. The last one is type. This is not common as well, but there are some times that you need it when you are creating, let's say you have a table that has a child or a parent, as the case may be. Those are like, there are some special function that handles that. Now, you see something like a type. Let me see an example. This is a parent-child function relationship. You see something like a type here. So essentially, what I'm trying to establish here is whatever function you're working on, whatever you're doing with a function, when you see a jargon that is mentioned or a parameter that is mentioned, you don't need to be afraid. The documentation has already taken care of that. All you just need to do is make sure you leverage the parameter naming. If you don't understand what that means, go to the parameter naming, see what it means. That way, it helps you work from point A to point B. Now, having talked about the parameter naming, there's one more thing that is important, which is the Dax statement, which is one more thing we'll look at before we start looking at some sample functions that I have here. This one is blue. Come here. That statement is here. Overview. These are statements that we use on a day-to-day basis. If you are not that advanced with it, there's no problem. Define, evaluate, order by, but I'm just going to, make so much reference to this last one, which is which is var. Now, var simply, means a variable. Now, when you are writing up a very long function, sometimes you need a variable. A variable is more like a container that holds a value for you. So you are doing a computation, you want to calculate the first time, but you want to use the output. That output, you want to use it some other later time within the same query. You can create a variable. That variable then helps you, to move along. Then when you get to the final place where you want to use it, you can just pass in the variable name and it
No, Michael.
Okay, I was about to be like, maybe it's just me. I didn't want to interrupt. Okay, let me just try and call him on phone then to see what the situation is.
Okay, I think I'm back. My network. Okay. Hello, Michael, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Where did I miss?
We are talking about var that maybe I have a long computation, then I want to store a calculation var and use it somewhere else down the line.
Yeah. Okay. So I was just about to, give an example of what a variable is. Okay. Let's see. Okay. This is a sample code here. It tells me, okay, this is what I'm trying to compute. I'm trying to compute year on year in percentage. Now, if I'm going to compute year on year in percentage, I probably need to compute two different things. First is, I want to calculate the sum of sales. Now, for me to calculate year on year, I need maybe this current period, I need the previous period. Then that gives me, I can then do a division, or as the case may be, to get the year on year that I need. Now, you can see here, I'll create a variable. Now, the variable is simply a container. It holds the outcome of this computation. Then I create another variable again that holds the outcome of this computation. Then I create a return value. Okay, I've created one variable, I've created a second variable. Then I'm going to use the output of the two variables to create my final return, which is, okay, I said, okay, if sales, I use an if statement, sales, and I said, okay, divide this by this and return this. Now, what I'm trying to establish is you would most likely see var being used in several sample codes that you will see over the internet. So there's nothing to be afraid of. It's essentially a container that is holding a value for you to use in the later part of your computation. There's really no big deal about it. Okay, going back to my presentation. Now, now that we've established what are the common things that you will see, especially the parameter naming and a regular statement that you see when you write the DAX. Just to go in a bit deep, I can't really go into everything. If not, we run out of time. I think we spent almost 45 minutes already. So I'm just going to take some few ones, and what we're going to do is essentially just look at the structure of those syntax. The structure is everything. When you understand the structure, you can read what the parameter is, you can see what the outcome is, then you are set. Anywhere you need to write a DAX for anything, or somebody send you a DAX code for you to read, it's as simple as just looking at it and say, okay, they use this function, that function, this parameter, this parameter. You look at the documentation and you're good. These are each of the category we look at the other time. So I'm just going to pick it one after the other. The first here is dates. Now, if I pull out a date function. Now, when you look at it, it shows me three things. It said this is the meaning. Return specified date in date time format. It says, okay, I use the date column. Now, if I'm going to calculate date, I need to put in year, month, and date. Now, I could do this, computing from a previous or existing column, or as the case may be. But I could just, maybe a computation could give me a number, I will pass it in as year. A computation could give me a month, I will pass it in. But whichever way, it gives me a quick breakdown of what it looks like. And this is common with most date function. Now, a number representing the year. Now, in this case, the year could be just a value. The year could be me passing in the output of a particular function. So I pass in a year, a month, a day, and it still gives me, the explanation of what it means to be a day. It just has to be an integer. But negative is not supported. Of course, you cannot have negative days or negative number. But just mean you pass in a valid number between 1 and 31, at least for days. Same thing for months, passing between 1 and 12. For year, you pass in between 999 to whatever, as the case may be, number of years. And it tells me what to expect in return. Now, this return is very important because it defines the context at which you're using it. If you're doing anything that relates to date, your outcome should be date. You wanted to get a date in return. Now, a date and an integer, they are different data type. There is so many number of them. You have a string, you have an int, you have a date, and on and on. You need to understand what your function is returning. In this case, my function here is returning the date time. So I know when I do this with this date function, I know what to expect back is a date time. Now, pay attention to your remarks when you're using a function. Now, remarks tells you what is possible and what is not possible, or what the outcome will look like and what it will not look like. Now, a date function takes the integer that are input as argument and generate the corresponding date. So I could put in 3 different integers for date, for year, month, and day, and it gives me an output that is a date. I could just do a quick demo here. Now, if you look at this is month. Okay, I only have weeks. Okay, I have year here. I could decide to create a new column here using the date function. Let me just do a quick demo, then you see what I'm actually making reference to. Let's say I call it new date. Say, okay, I pass in the date function. Now, the IntelliSense especially help you to know what to pass in next. Now, I could decide to pass in the year that I have here because I'm essentially creating a new column. That means I want year, I want it passed back. So it picks the year here and passes it into the date function. I can then decide, okay, I want everything to be February. I know February is 2. And I want it to be, let's say, 15th of February for every date that is here. Now, if you look at what I just did, I essentially do a combination of several things. Here, I use an expression. Essentially I pass in this column into my date function, then I decide to pass in a string, an integer, to actually do this. Now, what I pass in and what I get, at the end of the day, even though I pass in an integer into this, at the end of the day, this column here is a date column. If you look at my data type, it already tells me what you have in this column is a date and time. If I do anything contrary, let me just use an example like we have. It tells me, for example, the day. It said valid value are 1 to 31. Let's say I come here where I have 15 and I pass in, let's say, 32. We all know there is nothing like 32 day in February. this is essentially wrong. All it's going to do for me is, if you look at this, he has done some woo computation. He has added that day, add it to my date, and gives me an output. Push it all over to, April 4th. This is not what you want to do. Now, if you use this for some other further computation, it's probably going to return an error to you. It tells you, okay, this thing doesn't make sense. For months as well, I put in 14 months. There's nothing like 14 months. It doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, it's just do me had the excess months ahead, but at the end of the day, I don't get anything significant. My point here being, you need to be conversant of what you're doing, because here I just pass in some numbers and it doesn't make sense. Although you can use it for some other things, but don't let us go into that. The most important thing is you need to be careful of what you pass in so that you know exactly what you're going to get. And what you're getting, it tells you the data type is of type date and time. In contrast to Microsoft Excel, we store date as a serial number. That function always returns a date-time data type. However, you can use formatting to display date as serial number if you want. That's another level to it. And it tells you, okay, this function is not supported for direct query. So if you're using a direct query, for example, you don't want to use this because it's not going to work. It already tells you this thing doesn't work. These are sample codes. Essentially, what I'm driving home is you need to be conversant of what the structure of your DAX looks like. The DAX function you're applying, what does the structure look like? What are the expected inputs? What are the expected outputs? What are the parameters? Those are things that would help you gain more, it helps you see what you're doing. And the way you do this is you already know what you're trying to get. At the end of the day, you get it at the end. This is filter function. I'm going to try with calculate function. Calculate here. Now this is calculate function. Now if you look at it, it gives me the string, tells me okay, modify filter context. It gives me okay. There's also calculate table, which is a similar does a similar thing, but they are different. There's a syntax. This is my syntax. These are my expected inputs. These are the parameters that I pass in. I essentially have an expression. My expression then would have a filter. So for example, I want to calculate revenue per department, but I want to filter out some specific things. I can filter them out. Now, it gives me a lot of other things that I need to read up on. Now, it gives me, okay, there's Boolean filter expression. Maybe you create an expression, then the output is a yes or no. Those are Boolean numbers. You can filter the table. There are filter modifiers that you can use. Now, each of these filter modifiers are also they are also functions that you can read up on to see, okay, when do I apply this? When do I apply remove filter? When do I apply all except, key filter, user relationship? I think there was a question recently that somebody used this and used it to get to a solution. Now, if you have a data model where perhaps there is a relationship that is inactive because you are trying to not to create a circular relationship, but the relationship is there, it's just not active. You can use a function like user relationship to establish that relationship, meaning that you would activate that relationship and deactivate the existing relationship. Now, these are like supporting functions that helps you get to where you're going. That means the documentation, the structure is not fixed. You get to some functions, the output will be very much different, or the structure of the documentation will be different from what you've seen before. But what is most important is all the syntax, all the function that you see here. There's calculate, there's syntax, there's parameter, and on and on. I think our time is fast spent, but I think we've actually talked about the most important thing, and all you just need to do is ask yourself, how do you read the documentation? Now, the background that we've shared is for you to be able to go in by yourself, look at the documentation, and be able to comprehend what it's saying. Now, if you can't comprehend it, by looking at the parameter namings, the DAX statements, and all the supporting documentation, you can essentially go in there, look at it, read it up, and use that syntax for that function for whatever you're planning to do. I think we've fast spent our time. We're rounding up. How to select the right DAX function, I think, is very much important. Whatever you're going to do, you need to ask yourself, what problem are you solving? I want to calculate total sales. I want to calculate total sales per merchant. They are two different things entirely. But you being able to, picture yourself and say, okay, what do I want to achieve? You cannot just, pick up a table and start computing. If you don't know what you're computing, then what do you expect to get? You don't even have a bearing. You're just doing it. So you ask yourself, what do I have? You probably have a data that can help you, compute what you need. What possible inputs do I need to use to achieve my objective? So I want to calculate total sales. I have unit price, I have unit sold. I can calculate, I can do a calculated column, or I can create a function, a measure that helps me, compute that. Ask yourself, is it possible to answer the question using the existing data point that you've identified? If it's yes, then you can then proceed to doing your computation. Ask yourself, how do you want to present your results? So, for example, I said I want to calculate total sales. I want to calculate total sales per merchant. They are two different things entirely. And the choice of function that you select will then be determined by, okay, what are the expected outputs I want to get at the end of the day? I know we have a lot of guys here that are new. Pretty much you haven't really done much with DAX before. These are my recommendations to you. And these are recommendations that I just thought about from my experience, working with people, whether people that are new or people that are just, getting started or middle. Now, focus on solving the problem first before worrying about performance. The thing is, when you are doing anything on any business intelligence software, there are resources that you want to consume. There is limit to the number of tables you can load, depending on whatever type of subscription you're using. There is limit to the computation you can do. If the computation takes more than, I think for Pro, when you do something that is taking maybe more than 1 gig in memory, it throws, Power BI service will throw you an error telling you, okay, this computation doesn't really make sense. It's too much. Cut it down. But when you are working on your machine, on your local machine, there's nothing holding your resource. Your resource is as much as your system memory can take. So if you are trying to solve a problem, I would say solve the problem first. After you solve the problem, then start talking about performance. So I want to calculate a very big, something that is very complex. Now, after you do the computation, then you can then ask yourself, how can I make this better? Because if you worry about performance and at the same time you worry about solving the problem, you probably sometimes never get to any solution at all. But if you just, take one step at a time, you solve the problem, then after solving the problem, then you worry about performance, then you get things done much faster. At the end of the day, you can keep optimizing and optimizing whatever you've written to get to something that is, very okay and takes maybe little resource when computing. And if you are new, start with the most common syntax. Those are like min, max, calculate, sum, filter, if, count row, and on and on. Now, these are regular. Hold on, sorry. Now, these are regular functions that you work with every day in and out. There are things that you probably want to do every day. So you want to look at them, read them up. Any free time you have, just go into the documentation and read out, how do I operationalize this function? Now, most important, you do not need to memorize the syntax. You probably don't. Most people would use the DAX today probably don't know every single syntax every single function that is there in the documentation. You don't really need to cram. But maybe with repeated usage, you get to know some function, maybe offhand. You know what are the circumstances surrounding it, what are the syntax, what do I do, what are the expected return, what are the regular remarks that you get. Ensure your code is simple, readable, and reusable. It's very important. You need to make sure whatever you're doing, make it as simple as it is. For example, you want to create a measure that takes maybe 100 lines. You can break that measure into maybe 4 different measures. Pass each measure into the other one to get an expected output. At the end of the day, you have a modular code that you can use and reuse. Define your problem and have a mental picture of your expected output. It's very important. You know, in previous slide too, I said the output is very important. How do you want to present your results? It's very important. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know what you're expecting at the end of the day. That helps you, you know, select, okay, the appropriate function. Let me just round up. I just have one more slide left. Now, a lot of people work in a team, or you haven't worked in a team before. Now, there are some things that are expected of you when you work in a team. Now, when you work in a team, somebody will use what you have done, or somebody sometimes in the future will pick up the work you have done, and that person needs to understand what you have done. Now, there are some things that you need to be conversant with. Whenever you write a Dax function, you need to make sure you put in a comment. Sometimes the logic, you can't see the logic by just looking at the code. You just have to put in a comment that says, okay, I'm doing A because A, B, C, D. Put in a brief comment and make it as brief as possible. Remove unnecessary stories. You don't need to put a lot of stories. Just put the most important point that the person that looks at your code can as well just say, okay, I understand what this is doing. Now, use variables and formula name that is relatable. When you are writing a syntax, a very big formula, you need to put in names that are relatable because of reusability. For example, you are creating a table, you call it a fact table. A fact table is just a symbol, but really doesn't serve anything. You can as well just call it transaction table. That way, the next person that pick up your work knows, okay, this is the transaction table for this report. Now, format your code for readability is very important. Almost everybody I know use Dax formatter. So either you're using Tabula, or you're using forgotten the name. There's other Dax external tool. Make sure you format your code. It's very important. It's pretty much just copy and paste in Dax formatter and click on format. Then it gives you a better code that is better structured. All these help you, especially reusability and for someone else to pick up your code. Avoid repetition, reuse your measures. So instead of creating one big measure that is taking like hundreds of lines, you can as well just break it into 4 different measures. Now, each of these simple measures that you create, you can reuse it for other computation. Now, use variable in your formula and name them properly for the next person on your team to understand. It's very important. Audit your formula with a sample data. Now, especially when you work within a very big infrastructure. Let's say you have multiple tables, or you have a table that is, a lot of things is just so big that working with it in real time really doesn't make sense. You would be, wasting time waiting for compute time. You can as well just create a modular environment. Just create a sample data and use that sample data to develop. Sometimes you work pretty much faster when you're working with a sample data. And once you finish your computation and the sample data, then you can then, move it into your live environment and, see how it works. Now, I put in some resource that you can leverage. Now, I use SQL BI a lot because you find a lot of articles there that gives you sample measures or sample codes that people have used before. There are simple Dax, there are simple shortcuts when you're writing your Dax. I leverage Power BI community a lot. There's the community BI, that's the general BI. There's the Nigeria community as well, which I also belong. I think it's on Telegram, and we're also on WhatsApp. Now, these are things that they really helped a lot. You get stuck, you ask the question, somebody look at it and give you a response. These are things that would help almost everyone. Even the pros, sometimes, they get stuck and they ask questions and they get people to provide response. Now, Dax is different from SQL and Excel, although they are relatable. So if you have experience using SQL, you have experience using Excel, that experience, they will be valuable when you are, working with Dax. But it's still not a criteria for you to learn how Dax works. I think I've overspent my time, but I think we're pretty much close. I think I can pick question now.
Okay. Okay, so let me just read up from where we stopped the last time.
All right.
So, so Kazim asked the question, but his question is relating to, so let me read it out.
All right.
It says, please, what Microsoft plan can a small business of, say, 5 people buy that will have a Power Platform, inclusive of Power BI Pro? So what I did was, I knew I kind of have an answer in mind, but I went online to just confirm. So I gave him the link of where you can compare the plan, and the Microsoft has E1, E5, E3. E5 is, I think, the lowest plan they have that has all the Power Platform. Or again, if you have any other perspective to it.
Yeah, I think you pretty much answered it. Just go to the, if you go to the Power BI website, you see a space where you can easily do a quick computation of what type of resource you need. Now, it could be as simple as, just subscribing 1 or 2 license. It could be subscribing multiple license. There is Power BI Pro, there is Premium. Any of the 2 can work for you. But if you feel you need, a big, depending on the size of the data as well. So it's a different thing when you say a team of 5. A team of 5 might need a premium capacity. So there are other things that you need to put in consideration. How many are you guys? What sort of analytics are you doing? What sort of business intelligence are you guys doing? Now, those are things that you need to put into consideration. But if you go to the platform, just go to Power BI website, the link Michael shared, just go in there and do a quick comparison to see what works for you.
Okay. And okay, so Adams has a question for you. So are you still on the line? Let me just check if she's still here. So that maybe she wrote it as 1 sentence, but I think that 1 sentence is a summary. So it's better maybe she says, let me just check if she's still on the call. If you are still on the call, you can, okay, I think she's no longer on the call. It's no longer on the. Okay, let me just read it out as she wrote it. It sounded a bit vague, but since she's no longer on the call. So she's saying, are we doing more examples? Let me just go back.
Is that?
Have you seen her question? I'm trying to scroll back to where the question is. Are we doing examples today? And examples you've been doing. But anyway, did you get the question?
Yeah, I think I get the example. So we are just focusing on documentation. But if we're going to do an example, I think we've done pretty much the example. The example we're trying to, communicate here is whatever you need to do. Once you understand the documentation, that's everything you need. All the example is there for you to comprehend. Just know how to use it. If you know how to use it, you can pretty much do any computation that you want. So if you want to do a calculate, you want to use a calculate function, you want to use user relationship, you want to use a filter. So far, you are confident enough, go into the documentation, look at the parameters naming, look at the parameters that each of the functions is presenting or is asking for. So far, you understand that. That is all. I feel that is all the demonstration you need. Once you can do that, you are good to go.
Okay. And okay, so someone is my good Oga over there. Mr. Wale is asking that we should bring you back a second time, or that they need more. This is like, we should consider this like half time. You should come and do. So are you open to coming again too? But I don't know if it's okay. The way you said is like more scenarios, or you might want to. I don't know what approach you want to now. Maybe do the same thing again, or maybe do, I don't know. Ogawa, are you still on the call? Do you want to give clarity as to what? So maybe we can tie him down now. We can hook him on the.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Thank you for the nice intro. What I actually meant is that we I don't I'm just talking for myself, right? So probably need more scenarios where some of these. No, you just picked on a few of them. Yes, I kind of get the fact that yes, you can pretty much do whatever you want to do using the guide, right? But for beginners like us, even using the guide, you still need a you still need a human guide, to help you through for the first few times that you want to use it before you kind of actually get used to it. That's what I'm trying to say essentially.
Okay, I think that's fine. We can, schedule another session that we just purely do that. But you do know that those kind of session, 1 hour is probably not enough. So maybe, yeah, we can schedule some other session, to just do purely this time around. We know we already understand the computation, and we just do purely that, and treat some live scenarios and see. Okay, these are inputs, output, expectation, exception, remarks. Yeah, we can
Yeah,
we can schedule some other time.
yeah. Thank you very much. I think that's what the other lady that left was trying to also say. Yeah, that's what she was trying to ask for. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarity. So those are the questions. Thanks for everybody for staying this long, but I still have to beg you. There are always two more things we ask every guest we have, at least for the first time they are presenting. So we'll still ask you. I hope you still can dash us like 5 minutes of your time.
That's fine.
Okay. So question number one is, can you tell us about your own journey into this whole data analysis space? Can you tell us how was it like you started from you at the age of 2, or was it like you had already finished university before you found out that this is what you want? Or just we like to hear the personal stories and take inspirations from them.
Okay. So for me, I think my journey started a long time ago. So I kind of have some, I have interest in mathematics, even right from secondary school. Then I went to school to study demography and social statistics. And studying demography means you start learning how to operationalize different models. So you build a regression model. You first of all start, calculating regression model with your hand, calculate it on paper, operationalize it. When you're able to operationalize it, then you can then start using software like SPSS, Stata, Excel to operationalize those things. So I think my own journey started a very long time ago. From school, part of the courses that I took, some of them even mean, learning some of this, some of the software. You have to learn it. We have some open exam where you go in there with your laptop, they give you a live data, and you start crunching right there. So yeah, I think my own background, traced a very long time to, learning from school, but specifically to Power BI, I think I started with Power BI around 2016. So when I finished school, I used Tableau for a while because Tableau was in the market even before we had Power BI. I used Tableau for a while, but Tableau is a bit restrictive in terms of you getting into it and getting started. Then I had to get a 1-year license using my my university ID card. Then if you submit your university ID card, Tableau will give you 1-year license to use the Tableau desktop. So I think I used the Tableau desktop for like 2 years because I submitted the first time, the following year as well, I still submitted it again. They gave me a license. I used to practice a lot, but I wasn't really feeling it because it's pretty much simple, but I just really didn't communicate well with Tableau. But when I started using Power BI, that was back then in 2016, it feels, a bit more intuitive and easy to learn. And the DAX was also, it looks familiar. You've used Excel. you've used SQL, then you go into it, then it's pretty much relatable. So that was how I picked up on Power BI, do a lot of learning, online courses and the likes, and pick up and start moving up from there.
Okay, so just to do as part of question 1, because question 2 is your advice to people just starting out, but there's something I want to add to the question 1 that sometimes we ask is, this is your journey, right? What can you say was a defining moment for you, or what's like one experience that sets itself apart from every other experience you've had in this data space? It could be on a positive side, it could be on a negative side, it could even be relating to a job you are doing, it could be towards getting a job, it could be, whatever it is, but something that if you look over your career in this space, one thing that just stands out, uniquely for you, an experience that stands out.
Okay, let's see. Okay, I think I can just pick it up from, when I finished school, my first job experience was an internship in a think tank, more like a research institution. And when I joined as a research intern, because then you have to wait for NYC. Then after NYC, you get another job, or you just. But when I joined, pretty much my expectation is, okay, you do a lot of research, publication, and the likes. But for me, even as much as I try, I wasn't really feeling it. It just really isn't like a calling as it is. But as time goes on, as part of research, you need to do analysis as well. And I started picking up. There's an internal lead that handles most of the research and the like. So I just walk up to him and I said, this thing I can actually do it. Because I remember even when I was applying for the internship, I saw a job advert that the company is inquiring, okay, they're looking for somebody with a master's that have understanding of how to use SPSS, how to use data, how to do this. I was like, I just messaged the HR person saying, okay, you know what? I saw your invite saying this. I do not have a master. I just finished my BSc and I'm still waiting for NYC. But all of these things that you mentioned, I can actually do it. Analytics is something that I've been doing. And the person said, okay, let's take a stab. He said he will reach out, then he reached out, asked me to come for an interview, and on, and that's how it goes. And my experience within the think tank is, I finally found out that, okay, it seems doing analysis is something I want to do. I kind of find it interesting. It's usually challenging. You get to do something that is different every time. You do this project, the next project is going to be a new experience for you, obviously. And the next one and the next one. And let's just say for me personally, I don't like doing the same thing all the time. You being a data analyst, the highest degree of your work is sometimes automated. You only have to do it once or twice, then everything is done. Then subsequent time that you need to consume it, you just go there and consume. It means you have to keep doing new things day in, day out. So for me, those are like defining experience that I've had. Getting started and moving from.
You got the job. Like they gave you that role. Did they give you the role?
Yeah, they actually. So when I joined, they didn't give me the overall role, like but I got an internship as a research intern. And essentially when I joined, I was actually doing almost the same thing. Oh. That person that got that position was doing. We're essentially doing almost the same thing.
Whoa. Yeah. So they still went ahead and okay. That's really cool, interesting. So the final one, your advice to someone starting out right now. I know you've given a lot of advice towards the end where you said you know that some of us are starting and these are things. But then if in case maybe there's anything else you just want to say neutrally to anybody just starting out generally, like what maybe in terms of approach, in terms of how to go about getting their feet into the industry and getting grounded.
Okay. I like to say, if you're just getting started, take one step at a time. Do not be overwhelmed You know, there's a lot of information flying around. You know, even Google sometimes doesn't help. There's a lot of adverts flying in your face. Masters of this, champion of this, pro of this, that. Trust me, it's as simple as just starting one step at a time. Why not download the desktop? Any data that you know, data that you can relate with, or you've used on Excel or used anywhere, put it in there and start playing with it. Create a column chart, a pie chart, see how it works. You know, by the time you interact with it enough, you start learning. Then you can start picking up on simple courses. I usually tell people, if you want to start, yeah, it's great if you pick the course that is taught by some guy, you know, all the way from Australia, all the way from the US. Great courses are there, but why not pick from somebody you can relate with? Michael has published, you know, some courses on Udemy. Start with that. There is usually some degree of relationship that exists. Like you can, if somebody that you know or somebody that is close to you to some certain degree teach you something, you tend to communicate with it better than somebody you do not know, because your perspective and that person's perspective would likely, you know, be close enough. I could imagine, you know, where Michael is teaching you something on a course online. He will most likely make reference to a data that is coming from somewhere that you know. A data from Nigeria, a data from a company that you bought their products before, or a problem that a typical company within your own ecosystem would have a problem with, and they are solving. Then pick it from there and start learning and start moving one step at a time. You don't need to rush yourself. Do not be overwhelmed. There's a lot of information that flies on your face and sometimes make you look as if you know nothing. All those things, they are just some guys trying to game you and get you to pay some dollars for something. So start, take it one step at a time. Pick a data you can relate with, play with it. Go into the documentation, see how things work. Ask questions. It's very important. Belong to a community. I cannot stretch that enough. Even the best of us, we leverage the community almost every day. Contribute to the community, ask questions, answer questions. When somebody posts a question, answer. Even if you are not so 100% sure, tell them your own perspective. Don't be afraid. Even though you are wrong, nobody will kill you. Nobody will come out of their phone and come and attack you on the road and beat you up. Just answer. Tell him how you understand it. And trust me, you might be right, you might be wrong. But even if you are wrong, the next person will come and say, okay, the response you posted, okay, let's tweak it this way. If you add this and this to it, it works. Then that way you learn. That means you've learned one thing. Then you move to the next one and to the next and to the next. And before you know it, nothing will go past you that you do not know. Almost every question that comes around, even if you don't know the final answer, you have an idea. And that's the best way to start.
Thanks a lot for that. I was jotting down. So those of us who you missed any point, you can check the chat. I did a nice summary of all the points you made. So thanks a lot. And thanks for mentioning my course. I also know one of us, Ahmed, who has also come on the session. He also has courses that people rank really well. So don't feel pressure that it must be my course. You know, all of us, even I'm guessing maybe Ogarimo will one day push out some course. Just don't come to the consulting space, so don't come and squeeze us out of business. But anyway, one of the Brown used to say, which is why I so much like him a lot too, is that perspective. He says that it feels like the whole market in Nigeria is so wide that all of us, you know, are running at our full capacity. We don't have to compete yet. Like there's a lot of market for us all. So yes, you are welcome anytime you want to come join us. But thank you very, very much. And thanks to everybody who has stayed to this time. You know, we've used more than the 1 hour, and I'm guessing you are getting the value. And we thank our special guests for the knowledge share. People are asking that you should come back again. So I will speak to you in the chat and give you dates and you can tell us which day you would like to come back. I'm not the one saying you should come back now. You see, they are the one saying you should come back.
No worries, no worries. I'm being a part of the community as well. I'm very active there, so I will encourage you to join, whether the Telegram community or the WhatsApp community. Yeah, you have a question or you have a problem, we can all learn from each other. Trust me, nobody knows everything. But one thing is, we learn together. We are co-learning. So you have a problem, put it there. The thing is, even though you're not getting the final answer, you're not getting the final problem. Trust me, that question that you shared, somebody else is learning from it. And there are some people that whatever question you put up, they will find an answer to it. And trust me, in the process of doing that, they learn. They give you a response too. They tell you, okay, this is how I move from point A to point B. Even though you're not getting to the final point, you all learn, and we all learn. Even some people in the community, you only see them respond maybe once a year. But trust me, when you meet them in person and you're like, oh, this problem, he will tell you, I read it. Oh, it was the answer you provided to so question. That's how I'm able to relate and create a response or build my this and that. Trust me, whatever you do, be a part of the community, be an active member, contribute. Even if your own is just to respond with an emoji, it's still part of it. You'll find it very, very interesting. So everybody, I will encourage you, join the Power BI community. You will so much like it, and you will learn a lot. Even if you are a newbie, do not be pressured. Don't see long formula and run out of the group. It's not good. You see it and learn from it, and we all get to learn from each other.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Have a nice month ahead, not just week now. Nice month ahead.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.